before we officially kick everything off, can I air a grievance to you if it's okay?
Absolutely. Air grievance as you may.
So one of the minor issues that I have at my place of employment is that sometimes people call into the store. We receive calls into our store and nobody's on the other line. And I'm like, why am I even pick up to the phone, man? Like, this is just a waste of my time, a waste of my energy, like, giving and greeting.
Exactly. Yeah, we've dealt with that at work a little bit too, where it feels like I mean I'm not the one who answers the phones about 99% of the time. Every once in a while I'll have to, but yeah, it's just like if you're not on the other line, don't waste our time.
Yeah, exactly, man. However, like, keeping that in mind, I did have a strange occurrence today, though, when I picked up the phone and the person on the other line said this to me. Welcome to Americana. Please make your selection, followed by the pound sign now.
See, again, you look at someone like that who does something like that, you just be like, just stop being a bum, get a job. Why don't you get a job?
And welcome back, everybody, to the best music podcast on all sides of planet Earth. And the way that we measure that distinction is we go from Ukraine to Uganda, but the long way around. This podcast is called Hey, Listen to This, and it is hosted by two dashingly good-looking men who share the same middle name. I am the one. I am the only. I am the one who is hyped up on a lot of caffeine thanks to a cold brew his wife made this morning, Ryan James Kearns.
And I am the one, the only, I wish I could be that hyped up, but unfortunately I took the herbal supplement known as Dragon Ass, Matthew James Durzik. And on this episode of Hey, Listen to This, we do what we always do, which is look at each other and say, hey, listen to this. Now, what exactly does Hey, Listen to This mean? It means that we go over a music album of our choice. Mostly of our choice. We'll explain in a minute here. And we discuss each song on the album, track by track, discuss what we like, what we don't like, and this could be an album we like, an album that's come out, an album that is of historical context, and every once in a while we'll also talk about a bad album. We really haven't had a whole lot of bad albums to talk about, somewhat thankfully. So yeah, we're just two dudes who love talking about music. And Ryan, what did we do last week as far as talking about music?
So we finished up our 2025 Pride Month celebration by discussing the impactful, pivotal debut album by one of the architects of rock and roll, Little Richard. And for those of you who aren't aware, the album is called Here's Little Richard. And walking away from the review, I am extremely grateful that I was able to dive into a record by Little Richard because, like I said in the episode, prior to the review, I only knew Tutti Frutti, and that's basically it. So I was incredibly grateful for the ability for me to expand my musical taste buds.
I'm glad you were, because that is an album that not only is a good album to listen to and a good piece of early rock and roll for anyone who's interested in it, but also I think created a bit of a sort of a challenge for the two of us because, it's a very formulaic album, but it gets the job done for the most part. So yeah, our Pride Month coverage has concluded. So to start July, Ryan, a bit of a different thing, because as I mentioned, most of the time we're picking the albums that we talk about. But that's not quite the case this week, is it?
Yeah, so for the first time of the... I mean, I guess we've taken listener requests before, maybe, inadvertently because of our significant others, but I will say that this is a listener request, and that listener is my other friend, Matthew. I know him through, being a fantasy hockey nerd. We basically have chatted, extensively through Discord. So shout out to Matt out there, down there in Australia, listening to this episode right now. So yeah, and he, recommended and he requested we cover, two albums, and with this episode dropping July 5th, I figured the album that we're covering today would be the most appropriate out of the two. And what is that album, dear listener? You may be asking. Well, it is Americana by The Offspring. Now, for those of you who are like, what is an Offspring? Oh, cool. Yeah, I might feel a little bit old if, the Gen Zers out there who are like, oh man, what is an Offspring? And what is this song Pretty Fly for a White Guy? So I'll give a little bit of synopsis about, what is an Offspring and what led them to, this, I would say, essentially like a breakthrough record for them with Americana. So, the band formed in 1984 in Garden Grove, California. Initially, their name was Manic Subsidal, and the original lineup featured Brian Holland, aka Dexter, on vocals and guitar, Greg Kressel on bass, and James Ludja on drums. Now, if I'm mispronouncing that last name, I apologize. I'm not the best at, pronunciations. However, moving on. So, yeah, their formation, was most inspired by a riot at a social distortion show, and, also the profound impact of an album from a group called TSOL, and that album's called Change Today, question mark. This all happened in 1985. And another member, shortly after, the core nucleus was formed, his name is Kevin Westerman, aka Noodles, joined, and he completed the band's early core. Now, from, inception, and, from that moment on, the way that the band, broke into the mainstream, particularly before the release of Americana, was, the result of, just a lot of independent effort and a lot of smart moves in the 1990 alternative rock scene. So, after years of, working with their sound on independent labels like Nemesis and Epitaph, their 1994 album Smash was their first huge success. And now, for those of you who are not familiar with that album, it most notably had their biggest hit singles up until that point, Come Out and Play and Self Esteem. The former of the two is most, noteworthy. It's probably one of their biggest singles out there to this day. And Self Esteem is a cool track, nonetheless. So, Smash essentially launched them into international stardom with those hit singles. And so, around this time, there was a certain, group, a certain punk rock group, Green Day, that was coming up, and we also get bands like Blink-182, a lot of the early pop punk bands. So this perfectly positioned the Offspring to really just break on through and really start to make a name for themselves on the mainstream level. So the release that they had after Smash, Inex on the Ombre, released by Columbia Records in 1997, was not as commercially successful as Smash. I mean, it was a solid album nonetheless, and it did perform pretty well with solid sales and decent chart performance. And so after Inix on the Ombre, they had a very sustained momentum, and they were getting some decent mainstream appeal, and this was really prime conditions for the album Americana to be released. And the album that we're talking about today was it did debut at number 2 on the U.S. charts in 1998, and it was thanks to a lot of really good singles. The album had a total of 4 official singles, and those singles were "Pretty Fly for a White Guy," "Why Don't You Get a Job," "The Kids Aren't All Right," and the last single was "She's Got Issues." So that's a brief synopsis on how the Offspring formed, what caused them to form, how they were able to navigate the independent alternative rock scene at the time in the early 1990s, well, early to late 1990s, and how they were able to break through to the mainstream with this specific album that we're talking about today. Now, before I give my background with the Offspring and my personal relationship with them, I'm going to kick it over to you, Matt. What is your relationship with the Offspring?
To be completely honest, it's not much of one. A lot of these bands that we talk about where I may have heard 1 or 2 of these songs, even the songs off this album, the only one I've heard probably repeated times is "Why Don't You Get a Job." I did hear the unique part, let's say, of "Pretty Fly for a White Guy" as it was used in a mashup at the end of Neil Cicerega's Ultimatum Mouth Moods from 2016, I want to say, on the last track. So yeah, that's about as far as I know. I knew of these songs existing, like "Pretty Fly for a White Guy" and "The Kids Aren't All Right," and obviously "Why Don't You Get a Job," and also "Come Out and Play." But aside from those, I really don't have too much knowledge of the Offspring. At least I didn't before this review. Obviously, I've listened to the album a couple times, so I have a little bit more of an understanding of what the band is and are. But yeah, as far as background, not much.
I respect your relationship with the Offspring, and I feel like this. Well, I don't want to say this is going to be a rare occurrence, but I'm coming at this review from a different lens, because the Offspring was a band that I listened to a lot, growing up. I do believe I started out with the album that we're talking about today, Americana, and the couple other albums that that came out afterward, including Conspiracy of One and Splinter, were staples of my middle school and early high school rotation, and really enjoyed those albums. And I've any other decent Offspring fan have checked out Smash and appreciate singles like "Come Out and Play" and "Self Esteem," and I have dove into Annex on the Ombre. And outside of those albums specifically, really haven't gotten into any of their later materials, to be honest with you. I know that they had the one song off their 2008 release. Let me pull that up. You can keep this part in because this is going to be excellent material. You're Gonna Go Far, Kid. Yeah, that's a single that I was thinking about. That's a decent single. But outside of that, I think I listened to Days Go By once in terms of a whole album release, and I'm that's okay. But yeah, in terms of a total complete package with the Offspring, they're definitely a band that I don't want to say helped influence my musical taste as it is today, but I have a lot of fond experiences, listening to Americana, Conspiracy of One, and Splinter growing up. So, I'm pretty excited to do this review, my dude.
I am too. And before we get started, I was very surprised to hear you say that these guys formed in 1984 because listening to this, I would have guessed that they formed in the mid 90s and were birthed in the mid 90s and sounded like they were actually destined for the 90s based off of everything I've heard off this album. But we'll get into the details of why I'm saying that.
All right, so and I feel like the whole like early formation, like the 1984 thing, like that, it goes to show like I don't want to say like back in the day, but like just in general, like when a band originally forms and they formed under not the Offspring name, but they formed under the Manic Subsidal name, like it takes a while for like people to gain like gain momentum and like people to really commit to stuff, and like being in a band's hard, I guess. So without any further ado, are you ready to dive into this review with me with the first combo of like welcome and then have you ever?
Absolutely. And again, talk about the 90s. Welcome is a pretty solid start to that.
Yeah, pretty much. So yeah, so I'm not gonna really give too many thoughts into the track "Welcome" because if you want to know what it sounds like, just rewind to the start of the show here and hear my little like clever twist of phrase to kick us into the review, and there you go. So I will say like overall though, I'm a fan of how that starts out and how it kicks the album off into the main opening track, which is "Have You Ever." And, my thoughts on Have You Ever. It's a great way to kick off the whole album on a sonic level because, like, you get the punk rock element to a T. And for better or for worse, like, for those of you who are, like, maybe, like, super fans of the show, first of all, thank you. Second of all, you might be familiar with a certain kind of drum beat or certain kind of like musical effect that's used in like punk rock music that I've often described as like maybe as a turn off to me. And well, you find that here in this track here, and that's the offbeat drum beat that occurs through the whole track. And I mean, to be honest, it kind of works due to the the song's themes about like being lost and being confused on who you are. So I don't mind it so much, but later on in the review, there's gonna be times where like I just I'm a little bit turned off by the song because of the offbeat drum beat that like you find here. So outside of that though, like I do appreciate like several elements about this song. Like moving away from the drums, the guitar. I like how they're not doing traditional like chord smashing stuff during like the verses. Like I thought that was a pretty solid, use there, and also throughout the whole track you get the repetition of the word falling, 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 falling. And, due to the lyrical themes being about, like, losing control of your life, like, one of my favorite bars is found in the first verse here. And it's whenever he's talking about, like, walking through a room, but it was more like the room passed through you. Like, there was a leash around your neck that pulled you through. And I'm like, oh, man, I feel that on a sonic level, man. So, I felt like all that was, executed very effectively, and the track could have just ended like a traditional like punk rock song. However, we get the switch up at the end where things just like shift into a different gear, and dude, that shift into that second gear of that song is so good. It's one of the highlights off of the track for me. It's probably like the main highlight outside of the whole like falling repetition during the chorus. And the way that the whole song ends is with Dexter singing about like crime does pay, and that does go against the traditional, like, Americana values, where, like, crime doesn't pay. Dexter is, like, turning that notion on its head and saying, like, no, actually crime does pay. And yeah, I do like this song quite a bit. It's an excellent way to open up the album. It's not a top track for me, and full, like, running the full gamut here, show my hand here a little bit. I have a top 3 and a bottom 1 track here, so I only have a bottom song. So
Gotcha. Full disclosure on my end, I have a top 3 and a bottom 2 for Americana. And right out of the gate, I will say that this track did not land in either category. I do agree with you, though, that it is a good introduction to the album on a sonic and lyrical level, because you mentioned the offbeat drumming. I didn't have a problem with that on this song, or really throughout the whole album. Not in and of itself. Like, we'll discuss in a little bit how there are moments where I was like, did you really need to do that? But with this song, it's fine. It's fine. And I do like the riff. I do like how the guitars sound. And I think what makes the sort of blast beat work is the fact that the vocals on it are on a level that are kind of, they're not bad. They're not, like, delivered in a bad way or a bad sonic way, but the guy sounds amateurish, like he's just sort of a kid wearing, a cap backwards, sitting on a sidewalk on a summer day, just wondering everything about the world through the underdeveloped brain. And I mean all that as a compliment, for the record. Like, it sounds like a punk singing these songs, which adds to the punkish elements that are, presented by the band. I do like that transition. At first listen, I thought that we were going into a completely different song before realizing, oh wait, this song's not over yet. So that was kind of cool. But yeah, I like the lyrics a lot, because it definitely sets the mood of uneasiness without really diving full frontal into why that is. So it is a nice developer of a mood, more so than a developer of a setting. Now, obviously, as we talked about a few weeks ago with Toxicity by System of a Down, you just dive right in and say, hey, the prison system's corrupt. Drug money is going to the governments to run your country into the ground, and you are going to be put into prison. Like, that's cool too. But this one just sort of eases into the philosophical mode of things may not be quite as hunky-dory in America as they seem. So, yeah, I was a fan of this track too. I thought it was a good introduction.
I'm glad we're right there, with each other here, and it's gonna be interesting to hear what you have to say about, like, Dexter's vocals, like, going through the rest of the album here, because, like, I grew up with The Offspring, and Conspiracy of One was in my constant rotation, so I think I'm a little bit, like, I don't want to say more accustomed to his vocals and his singing as compared to somebody that isn't, like, familiar with that. Well, not familiar, but, like, hasn't been exposed to it nearly to the extent in his formative musical journey. So, oh man. So, I think we're ready to move on to, a song about staring at the sun.
Yes, moving on to Staring at the Sun. And once again, we have a relatively up-tempo, what I would consider basically punk thrash and bash sound here. And the band does sound good. Like, the drums sound good, the guitars sound good, and once again, the vocals sound good as well from Dexter. And lyrically, it's pretty simplistic. It's basically about how, there's this guy who is dealing with this relationship issue, and, if this person's staring at the sun, I can't help you if you're staring at the sun, If you're not looking at me and we can't work this out, then there's no way that we can be able to, figure this out. So sonically and lyrically, I do like it. The one small nitpick I have with this, and it's not a bottom track, but I do have a bit of a nitpick with it, is it starts with such a really nice groove, like a very solid, like, I almost want to say it's like mainstream rock groove at the start. And then at the second verse, it just slightly shifts tempo up and goes in the major thrash and bash. And that is a moment where I was like, okay, this doesn't sound bad, but did you really actually need to have to do this? Like, I listened to it and I thought to myself, it's basically the Michael Scott meme of, I'm fast, I'm very fast, in music form. So that kind of was like, I'm not so sure about that. But it didn't deter me so much that I put it as a bottom track. I thought it was pretty solid, and you know, it gets close, not to the point where it's fully this, but it is close to the. It's a great track. I would say it's a great track if you're not paying any attention. But even if you are paying attention, it's still a solid, good track.
So, like, I actually like that section that you're talking about where, like, you know, you get that shift in tempo in that second verse. I actually had that as a highlight off the track for me. Like, you know, maybe I'm quietly Michael Scott trying to go fast, really, really fast in my own day in life. So, anyways, so yeah, I think I'm a higher on this track, a little bit more than you, but I would, you know, put it on the same, like, you know, rating scale as the previous track, Have You Ever? And mainly because, like, I feel like this is very much a part two to the opening track. Like, you get a 1-2 punch. Have you ever, like, you know, Staring at the Sun? It would have been actually kind of funny if, like, they actually named it Stare at the Sun. Like, that, I think that might have been a little bit too much on the nose. But anyways, I digress. So yeah, like I mentioned, I did appreciate the shift in the gear that you found in the second verse. Like, it's a very nice open, a very, very decent open with how, like, the whole track begins. But, like, you know, yeah, with that shift in tempo in that second verse, like, everything gets kicked up to 11. And, like, one thing I noted is that the drum work here is so good. Like, it was pretty much top notch. I did appreciate it a great deal. And the other section I do want to highlight is that there's a specific section where the instruments cut out, and it's so good. It's like, you know, it's like the moment where you're about to go downhill on a roller coaster, or, like, you know, you're in the middle of a roller coaster and you got, like, a little bit of a moment of you, like, you're cresting, and then you go back into, like, the rest of the coaster, and i.e. the rest of the song here. So yeah, I felt like that section was pretty solid, and you kind of hit the nail right on the head here in terms of what this song is about on a lyrical level. Like, it's basically being, you know, about watching everyone else trying to fit in. Like, you know, you equated it on the level of a relationship. I think the way I took the lyrics, it was more about, like, you know, just trying to deal with society as a whole, and just, like, you know, not being suckered into the destruction that, like, you know, society, you know, basically signs themselves up for, and, like, just trying to maybe stand out for their, just being like saying, hey, I'm not gonna take part in society. And, like, you know, the line found in the fourth verse basically illustrates this, where Dexter's saying, and so forgive me, but I won't be frustrated by destruction in your eyes. And like, I thought that was a nice line. And another thing, more so on the lyrical front, like, Have You Ever was centered around the phrase, and they use the word falling. Like, they executed that so well. Here, everything's basically centered around the phrase, you're staring at the sun. Maybe not too, I did appreciate how that phrase was the grounding point for everything else in the song on a lyrical front. However, like, you know, I did appreciate how in the previous track the word falling was used a little bit more effectively. But, you know, either or, like, you know, I appreciate each track on the same level. Yeah, I feel like we're ready to move on to Pretty Fly for a White Guy, if you are.
I am, and unlike Staring at the Sun or Have You Ever, there's really not any ambiguity to the lyrics of this one, is there?
Yeah, pretty much not, man. So, like, for those of you who are listening to this episode right now and don't know what this track is, first of all, honestly, thank you. Because, for those of you who are familiar with this album and familiar with the group as a whole, most likely you are familiar with Pretty Fly for a White Guy. Like, it is the most iconic song off the whole album. And it's for a decent reason. Like, it's a pretty great song in its own right. It's a song basically centered around, like, posers and fake gangsters and, like, just wannabe types. And, like, there's several, great executions of, like, samples and just, different moments that make this song stand out for, one reason or another. And, like, I'm going to start out with, like, the opening spot, which is actually, if you aren't aware, it's a Def Leppard sample from their song Rock of Ages. And that sample was, like, in the context of that song, it's used more as a count-in, as, what I mean by a count-in, like, traditionally, like, when musicians and bands are counting into a song, it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, like, you get that sample used as a swap out for, like, the traditional 1, 2, 3, 4 there. So, and, like, outside of that, like, in the chorus, or, like, after that intro, you get that, that processed, hyper vocal from the female end, and the guy answering back enthusiastically. So, like, I thought that was, like, really, really good. Like, that whole intro is, like, iconic, and it's executed to a T. So, yeah, I did dig that. And, considering that the previous two tracks were very much on the punk rock angle with, like, Have You Ever and Staring at the Sun, like, I did dig the more loose instrumentation that you get here. I felt like that was a great switch up on the band's front. I'm always a fan when a band can show the versatility within an album. The chorus is just, it's really, really good. It's probably the best chorus off the album so far. I didn't properly rank the choruses, so maybe, like, as we progress further down into the review, I'm going to be like, no, this is the best chorus. No, this is the best chorus. No, this is the best chorus. Welcome to being in my brain here. So, in terms of another section that I want to highlight, like the section where they're talking about him getting a tattoo, like, that was a highlight for me. It's more so used as a bridge within the context of the song, but it's executed pretty much flawlessly. So, yeah, I don't really have much else to say about Pretty Fly for a White Guy. So, but I guess the only other thing I got to say, it just missed my top 3. So I left this out of the top tracks off the album.
Wow, a little bit of a spicy take there. I can respect it, though. I can respect it. So for me, first of all, I've forgotten that the song starts with a sample of Def Leppard, which I legitimately wonder how much they had to pay for it and why they decided to go with it, but it works somehow. I did like how in the chorus, I wouldn't even say the chorus, but definitely that exchange, like you said, the female-male exchange, which I would consider probably the main chorus of the song, or at least the highlight of the song for me. In the lyrics, it talks about how, about dancing to the brand new thing, and has anyone else ever heard a chorus like that before? The only song I can compare it to is a song from the rap group Two Live Crew called Me So Horny, where they sample bit from Full Metal Jacket, and the sample here, I don't even know if it's a sample or if it's just other recording that they got for this song, but it very much reminds me of that, just the sort of call and response part of that. Aside from that, I'm pretty much in full agreement with you. Like, the band sounds great on this, and what I love about the, as you call it, loose instrumentation, is the fact that unlike the first two songs where they decide to change tempos for little to no reason other than the fact that they could, here they just keep it down to a straight, simple beat. And I refer to that as the KISS method, keep it simple, stupid. And I think they execute that very, very well here. Like, this song became a hit for good reason. It's catchy, and the lyrics are pretty good too. Like you say, it talks about posers, and it has a very sardonic sense of humor about it, about how, these guys, he wanted to buy tapes from Ice Cube, but he bought Vanilla Ice instead, but he's still cool. It's just like, are you sure about that? Are you really sure about that? So yeah, the track is funny on top of everything else, and I do have it in my top 3. I have it at number 2 in my top tracks.
I can respect that, and I mean, Catch Me on a Different Day, well, yeah, I was about to say Catch Me on a Different Day, and I would easily put this into like a top 3 contention, but not gonna reveal too much into my top 3 so much. But the reason why my third favorite song overtook this song here specifically was that I have more of a personal background with the song, and it was more in my rotation, and yeah, it's more, I like it personally more, which I mean kind of makes sense given the context of it's not in my top, like that's in my top 3 as compared to Pretty Fly for a White Guy. So yeah, and also I know we're talking about the album and the track here today, but for those of you who have not seen the music video for it as of right now, after you get done listening to this episode about us discussing Americana by The Offspring, do yourself a favor, check out the video for Pretty Fly for a White Guy, and also while you're at it, check out the video for Why Don't You Get a Job, because that's a fun video as well. So yeah. Shifting gears over to another single off of the record, and that would be The Kids Aren't Alright.
Yes, The Kids Aren't Alright. Now, we go back into punk mode with this song, and not only that, but we get into a song, the niceness of Pretty Fly for, I wouldn't even say the niceness of Pretty Fly for a White Guy, but just the sort of humoristic, upbeat, fun, vibey type of sound that it was, kind of on its head, because this song, while not necessarily not upbeat, because it's very upbeat, it's very fast and very powerful, the lyrics are considerably darker. When you get to lyrics like, when we were young, the future was so bright, the old neighborhood was so alive, and every kid on the whole damn street was gonna make it big and not be beat. And then they realize, hey, no, that's not what happened. We did not make stardom, and now we're paying the price of getting older and not doing anything with our lives. And the way it's delivered, to me, it sounds like the midway point, both lyrically and sonically, between like peak Green Day, or like early Green Day, I should say, with songs like Longview and Welcome to Paradise, to Spanish love songs and songs like Losers too. Like, this is to me like the midway point between that, because it sounds so anxious, angry, and revealing all at the same time. And once again, the band, the singing on here is very good. Like, it's very powerful and very anthemic, and it deserves to be anthemic. And once again, the band, KIS method, keep it simple, stupid. It's a very solid work by the band. And honestly, this would be like one of the best songs of like the 90s. If it had just a slight bit more polish. Like, there's something about it that doesn't make me go, oh my goodness, this is like one of the greatest songs of all time. But I will go as far as saying that this is the greatest song on this album. It is in my top 3 at number 1.
Oh my goodness, man. Number 1 with the bullet. You're coming out of the game to be like, this is the cream of the crop. So I am gonna agree with you that this is one of the best 3 songs off the record, so it is in my top 3. Once I get done, giving my dissertation about the track here, I'll let you know if it landed at a 1, 2, or 3 spot here. So I agree with you that the lyrics are a blend of like, Green Day, Welcome to Paradise meets like, Spanish love song. So it's like almost like a again, I might be I know like early emo rock like Sunny Day Real Estate had already come out like before this album and this track was released, but like this was probably one of the most mainstream like dark hits to hit the airwaves at the time. And like it's interesting like you mentioned, we go from like Pretty Fly from for a White Guy to The Kids Aren't All Right. Like that's a bit of a whiplash in terms of feel and everything like that. And like the like even outside of the lyrics, like the way that the whole thing begins with that guitar riff in that intro, like you get the sense like there's a sense of a little bit of a darkness to this track, and I love that, man. Like the way that that's executed and how essentially that builds up into like the guitar establishing a motif, like almost like a melodic riff. Like I did enjoy that. The chorus is really good. It's one of the best choruses off the whole record. Comparing it to like Pretty Fly for a White Guy, I think I prefer Pretty Fly for a White Guy's chorus a little bit more. But here, like it's a solid chorus in its own right. And also millennials out there, rejoice! You get the whoa ohs backing vocals here. Like that's a millennial trope there in the music world. And yeah, just the only other things I gotta add to the discussion here that you already haven't laid down. So one of the things that inspired the song here was that somebody from Dexter's neighborhood that he grew up with died from getting hit by a car. So like and it's interesting, like somebody that he wasn't specifically from my neighborhood, but he went to high school with me. He was one of my high school friends, and he unfortunately died from an automobile accident. I would say like maybe like 5 years ago, or like years ago, and it was very surreal thinking about like how life can change for people. And like that's the message of the song. Like you grow up and you have like these hopeful aspirations as a kid, like be like, I'm gonna make something out of myself, I'm gonna be like the best bread maker out there in the world. And then the world comes crashing down, and you'd be like, actually bread making isn't a thing anymore, unless you want to be a TikTok, but like you don't want to rot your brain by being a TikToker. So yeah, anyways, excellent song. If you really just want to dive into the lyrics, the entire second verse gives several examples of how hard life can be. Like that's it to a T. In terms of a top 3 and where this lands, I'm gonna go one step down from you, and I'm going to say that this is the second best song off the whole record.
Okay, that's fair. I mean, it's definitely a top track, and it's a highlight as far as everything. I'm just a little concerned that we may end up fighting here, because that possibility is still open for conjunction, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there.
Yeah, and to be fair, like I don't think we've ever like even though like in our most contentious episodes, like I don't know, for those of you who want to see like hear a decent example of that, go check out our Bruce Springsteen episode. So that was a contentious episode, and like I would say for more of a recent example too, our Frank Ocean episode, that was an episode filled with like some debate, but we're never like walking away from these reviews being like, man, that other person, he has a cockapoo opinion. Like we respect each other's opinion, man. So we're friends for a reason, my dude.
Oh yeah, we are. And again, the times that we have had conflicting tracks like that, I think, or off the top of my head, I can think of the Gang of Use episode where your favorite track was my least favorite. We discussed it thoroughly, and we kind of understood where we were coming from. So That being said, I am ready to move on to the next track, which is Feelings, if you are.
Yeah. I'm ready to talk about some feelings. But yeah, the track, it's a mixed bag for me, to be honest with you. Like, on the one end, like, the lyrics and the singing are pretty shallow. Like, the lyrics are basically talking about, like, hating somebody. That's pretty much to a T. And, like, the whole singing and everything like that, it almost seems like it could be a parody of, like, emo rock, pop punk as a whole. So yeah, there's that. And, like, a little bit of a background behind the track here before I get into, like, the instrumental part is that technically this could be considered a punk rock cover of Morris Albert's Feelings. Except for in that song, those lyrics were originally about love, and these lyrics here are about hate. So, like, they took the lyrics and flipped them on its head, and just like, the numbers of words that Dexter had to change to completely change the meaning of the song, like, they were actually very small in comparison. Now, I didn't, like, look up the original, like, song versus this here, so I'd be curious to do that, post review here later on this evening. However, like, what saves this track here from being a bottom track for me is the fact that the instrumentation, it's really good, dude. Like, the way that it kicks off with the guitar, like, riff and the drums, like, they're doing really good stuff there. And, like, even outside of the intro, like, the guitar work and the verses are like it's amazing guitar work. Like, I was really taken back by it, and I'm gonna honestly say it's probably the best guitar work out of the whole album, if I could be so bold to say. And, like, outside of the guitar work and everything like that, I mean, Millennials Rejoice, the whoa feelings, like, the whoa vocals are back here to stay. And another highlight for me in this track here is a section where Dexter says go, and then a guitar solo happens. I thought that was executed pretty effectively. So yeah, Feelings is a pretty much of a mixed bag of a track for me. It's a weird way to end off side A of the record because, like, on one end, like I said, the vocals and lyrics are kind of they are subpar, but the instrumentation basically does do a lot of the heavy lifting to keep it out of the bottom track territory for me.
Yeah, I'm probably a slight hair higher on this track than you are. It's not in my top three, but to me, this signified basically a simplistic version of the first couple songs on the album, because for the majority of it, it does not change tempo at all. It goes very fast, very hard, and doesn't stop until that slowdown at the end, which at first I was kind of like, again with the tempo changes, but then I realized, hey, this one actually has some sort of context. It basically is saying, here is the end of the song, the big, grand, ba-da-da-ba-da-da-da-da finale. Sort of like, Sinatra or Dean Martin or whoever you want to throw in there. So it adds context here, and I wasn't that turned off by it. Aside from that, I agree with you that the band sounds great. I agree with you that the vocals sound very good and angsty throughout. And the lyrics, where you say that they are shallow, I can kind of understand where you're coming from. I decided to interpret it as simple. Like, they just, it's not really much more than, hey, I have these feelings of hate. I want them to go away. Repeat, and guitar solo, and goodbye, everybody. Enjoy the fish. So yeah, like, I to me, this is definitely a slightly above average album track. Like, it's very much a thrash and bash punk song, if there ever was. Like, this is like the Miller Lite of punk songs. Like, it really, it can get worse. It could definitely get better, but for what it is what it is.
And I agree with you, man. Like, if one thing was changed on either end of the spectrum, like the appreciation of the track could, like, greatly shift to one aspect or another. So yeah, it's just interesting that, like, the lyrics were feelings, and, like, the way that was executed, like, it was a very interesting track for me, and, like, it's a track that I'm very grateful to have discovered, thanks to the review that we're doing here today. But yeah, I feel like we've talked about our feelings so much. Are you ready to discuss why she's got issues?
Yes, let's discuss about why she's got issues. And I will say that the band on this track sounds great. Like, the guitar sounds great, the drums sound great, and I like on the verses how you get that cymbal work that is seemingly very reminiscent of the song "Time of the Season" by the Zombies. I heard that cymbal and I thought that's kind of what it sounds like. That being said, the good part of my appreciation for this song has come to a close because there are two major issues I have with this song here. Number one, the lyrics. Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. I understand that in any romantic relationship, there's going to be things where you're going to say, I don't really want to deal with this right now, and I don't want to talk about this, and I know having a conversation about that is going to be difficult, so maybe I'll just, like, jot them down in a diary. But doesn't necessarily mean I, as a consumer of art or any type of music, really want to hear it, especially when they lack in empathy as hardcore as these do. Like, to me, this is, like, you could write a good song about how the other person has issues and you're not ready to deal with them, or you don't want to deal with them, but the punk format in which this is delivered and the way that it's sung, which I'll get to in a second, it just comes off so very, look at this girl, she's crazy, don't want to deal with her. Men, rise up and come to me and say, women, am I right? Right? This guy gets it. And I'm sorry, like, that turned me off so hard. Like, almost as bad as I'm No Good from Brooks and Dunn turned you off when we discussed that album. And the over singing on the chorus does not help. That's my second major nitpick with this track. Like, again, the context for, like, Pretty Fly for a White Guy or Even Feelings or The Kids Aren't Alright, like, the singing sounded punk and precisely punk. Here, the woes are just off-kilter, off-pitch, and they do not sound good at all. So, mixing a rather mediocre vocal performance with some rather loathsome lyrics, and again, let me reiterate, it's okay to feel issues of frustration. I just didn't like how it was presented here at all. So, shocker, we have arrived at my least favorite track off of Americana, which is She's Got Issues.
Man, you have issues with she's got issues, man. Oh, the irony, man.
Yeah.
Oh man. So where do I begin? So, I think I'll begin with the overall singing of the track here. See, for me, like, I actually did dig the way that the vocals came across in the chorus, like the it like vocalizations, or like the like the woes, like the not the actual, like, lyrics, but like the way that, like, you could really feel the passion and the energy behind Dexter's vocals there. Like, it landed well in my ears. And also, like, outside of that, I mean, I didn't really take too many issues with the lyrics. I mean, like, the whole premise of the song, it's a guy just being angsty, not angsty, but like, just being annoyed or what was the terminology? Yeah, being angsty to the point of annoyance with dealing with his significant other at the time. Now the lyrics that I do want to dive into is now that she talks about her ex, but I don't mind. But when she calls out his name in bed, that's where I draw the line. Like, I I don't see too many like I don't see an issue with that. Like, on the through the lens of what the song is specifically about. And like, you get to also get the lyric about like, the whole daddy issues, like, comparison there. So now the reason why I feel like I'm a little bit, well, a lot higher on this track than you are is that the fact that like when I was growing up, like this was, a track that I played ad nauseum, day in, day out, like, specifically whenever I was having issues with a significant other at the time. So, like, a young Ryan Kearns identified with the protagonist in this song, and he was like, yeah, man, she's got issues. But, yeah, I mean, I get what you're going at from the angle here, specifically with the lyrics. Maybe have a little bit more empathy, but I don't think that wasn't the lens that Dexter was going for at the time. And like, even scooting past the lyrics to talk about like other highlights off the track here for me, is that like one thing that I noticed is just like it was a decent moment in the production where like the drum beat or like just there's moments where you hear like what almost sounds like hand claps and vocal sides, but I'm not exactly sure what they were going for specifically or how it was executed, but like I'm sure I like the like overall like I did like the sound of that. And yeah, just the way that the whole track ends off where Dexter singing like, if you think I'm controlling, then why do you follow me around? And like just how that whole wraps up with the sense of finality within the track. Like I did like that a lot. And maybe this is gonna be a running trope, definitely gonna be a running trope in this review here. Like the chorus here is really good. Like I honestly feel like it's a highlight off the whole record. Now would I compare it more so, like, would I could say that this chorus is better than Pretty Fly for a White Guy? No, Pretty Fly for a White Guy probably still has a better chorus overall. But yeah, like I'm a decent fan if She's Got Issues. I don't know if you're able to tell, and I think like you might have picked up that we were gonna have a disagreement here. It's not my favorite track off the whole record. I'll let you know that. It's my third favorite.
Okay, so we flipped the tables from last week where I had Long Tall Sally in my top three, and it was your least favorite. Now you have She's Got Issues at number three, and it's my least favorite. So pretty even there. But I'm glad we didn't have to set the timers to 5 o'clock. So yeah, I'm glad we at least avoided that. But I this is, to me, like, if it weren't for the over-singing on the chorus, which, again, I think it's over-singing, this would fall perfectly in the it sounds great if you're not paying attention category. But unfortunately, I was paying attention, and the over-singing didn't help for me. So, yeah, this is at the bottom for me. And it's a shame, too, because I agree the band, for the most part, sounds great on this track, but not great enough to make me want to hear about... And I'll also acknowledge, too, that you having a personal experience, like, relating to the song definitely is a shift. Like, I obviously have not heard this song before this review, and I never really had any experiences that are close to that. So, yeah. So, this is why we discuss these things, because we may be coming at it from wholly different angles, and in this case, that was the case.
Yeah. And one other thing I'm going to highlight before we kick it over to Walla Walla is the fact that, earlier in the review, you hinted at well, like when you were discussing the this track here, you hinted at the Brooks and Dunn review that we did and like the one specific track off of there that we had a disagreement on. Like, we both come from like a different experiences of that, and it does like affect our perception of things one way for one reason or another. So yeah, that's the beauty of like doing the show here. We both express our opinions, and I'm glad that we both like we don't compare notes and we don't have group think. So yeah, you ready to talk about the next track, Walla Walla?
Yes, Walla Walla, and here we go back into thrash mode. Although it does start with an intro that I did not like the first time I listened to it. The second time I was like, okay, fine, whatever. That 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Like the first time it sounded a little too processed for my taste, and then I was like, okay, whatever, fine, it's okay. But yeah, this song is basically about how this one guy is trying to, get out of prison or get out of a sentence for a crime that he committed. And the crime in this case is stealing a VCR. Once again, tell me you're from the 90s without telling me you're from the 90s. So I thought that was an interesting dating as far as the song goes. But as a whole, it just kind of feels like this song is basically what would happen if a bunch of white kids from the suburbs tried to rewrite Living for the City by Stevie Wonder. That's exactly what this song reminded me of, at least from a lyrical context, because it definitely has that conjunction of, hey, is this guy a bad guy or isn't he? Because it feels like, hey, this is where he's coming from. He didn't do such a bad thing. But also looks at the other side saying, no. You committed a crime and you're going to Walla Walla, which is the, from what I understand, one of the state penitentiaries in the state of Washington. So, yeah, this was a good song to me. Again, the band sounds good. I do like the vocal back and forth on the bridge where the guy's saying, I didn't do it. And the guy after is like, nah, you're going away. Like, I thought this song was kind of fun in that regard. It's not in my top 3, but it came somewhat close. I'd probably put this in the top half of the album, all well told.
I'm right there with you, man, to be honest with you. Like, it could have catch me on a different day. It could have been in contention for a top 3 spot because, like, it's such a fun track. And I agree with you on like several aspects of it, like the spoken word bridge that you were talking about, like that's a highlight for me, and the like you said that the lyrics are talk about a friend who like the lyrics are about Dexter talking to a friend who is going to prison essentially for stealing a VCR. Shout out to VCRs out there. Yeah. Anyways, and I feel like I'm higher on that intro than you are because, I thought that was executed pretty amusingly, and for those of you who have heard the song and don't know the actual context of the intro, like it's basically Dr. Beat, the metronome, sit like like the metronome application, like and for those of you who know what Dr. Beat is on the as a metronome, you guys are the real ones out there. Shout out to you guys out there. So outside of those moments, I love the chorus. It's really, really fun. One of the best off the whole album. Pretty Fly for a White Guy still has a better chorus, though. As I'm comparing the rest here so far. So, yeah, the way that the chorus, goes and how it's, centered around the word Walla Walla, I felt like that was a great use of that word and how they were able to write it to establish, the groove of the chorus. I thought that was great. The guitar did excellent work in the intro, establishing the melody of the song. I felt like that was executed pretty well. And shout out to the drum work and the bass work during the verses, because I felt like that was, really great as well. The whole band sounds great. The lyrics are fun and Dexter is singing pretty well here. So yeah, it's a really great album track for me. I'm a fan of Walla Walla, but it didn't do enough to just stayed right outside of a top 3 contention for me. So
Yeah, like it's a very upbeat track. Like I almost thought to myself while listening to it the second time around, like this could almost be like a goal song for like the Kraken or any other. If Seattle has an MLS team, like this could be like their "We Scored a Goal" song. Also, I appreciate you mentioning Mr. Beat. I did not know that that's where that came from, and I assume that the only reason you brought that up was to A, show your knowledge, and B, give your former college classmates a little bit of PTSD. And finally, it's very fascinating to me that you keep like nudging songs that are in your top 3 or close to your top 3 underneath the chorus of a song that isn't like it's a top chorus, but it's not in your top 3. Like that's a fascinating trope I'm picking up on throughout this review.
what can I say, man? I'm a very fascinating man, but
that is true.
but before we go on to the next track here, the end of the line, Matthew.
Yes, Ryan.
I have a question for you.
And what is that question?
If the dear listener out there right now in the audio podcast sphere, like they are currently finding us to be a very fascinating show, the way that we're able to banter on back and forth about like Dr. Beat and like She's Got Issues and like just the overall what we bring to the table here, like the chemistry, the albums, like just the whole package of what we're bringing to the table. What are some ways that they can help support and show appreciation for what we do on a week in, week out basis? That way we can keep wallowing through our episodes on a week in, week out basis.
Well, one thing they could do is, again, just keep getting the word out about us. Again, if you look for our podcast, you could find it on pretty much any and all podcasting platforms, whether it's Apple Music, Spotify, Pocket Cast. We upload our videos to YouTube every week, so if you want to listen in on your YouTube music playlist, you can do it that way too. I just noticed today one of our episodes reached 400 views, which is by far and away the most viewed of any of our episodes. So again, thank you to those who have been watching on YouTube. We're also on social media, not just YouTube, but we are on Facebook, we are on Threads, we are on Blue Sky, we are on Instagram. So if you want to follow updates for what shows we're going to be doing, I know we've been posting links to some of the stuff we're talking about before the episode drops, if you want to check those out as well. Also, if you want to reach out to us directly, we do have an email account. It is ttheylisten@gmail.com. That is ttheylisten@gmail.com. And ttheylisten is also our username throughout all of our social media, so that's how you can find us there as well. Give us a listen. Share your links. Tell a friend who may be into, if they're really into all music, all kinds of music, not the actual site All Music, but if they are into that, we have episodes for that too. But if they are into all different kinds of music, and they're into podcasts, or if they're just into one particular album or artist that we talk about, you can shoot them that link as well. But again, for those who have supported us throughout all of this so far, thank you, because again, we're just doing this for the fact that we love it. We love talking about music, we love presenting it to you, and we thank you for the support that you've given us so far.
Yep, and I'm right there with you. Thank you for every listener that has taken the time to do any of the actions that Matt just mentioned, and even just giving us the time in the day, even if it's just a 30-second play on YouTube, or just even to casually scroll through our feed to see what we've covered. It means a lot, and like we say on practically every episode, the show is not sponsored by any podcast network. It's not produced immaculately. We don't have a third person doing the production here. Like, it's basically just me and Matt. We're team here. Like, occasionally we'll get input from, like, other people, but it's mainly us just doing the work week in, week out. So, like, thank you. And it's been a absolute pleasure to do this show with you, my dude.
Likewise, my man. It has been a fun journey that I do not see stopping anytime soon. So, that being said, are you ready to move on to the back end of this review of The Offspring's Americana with the end of the line, ironically enough?
Yeah, absolutely, my dude. So, yeah, end of the line. Earlier in the review here, when I was talking about, like, staring, well, have you ever, with the punk rock offbeat drum hits, and I said how they were going to return in the later half of the record. Well, they're back here, yeah, ladies and gentlemen, and those who identify as anything in between. Like, the punk rock offbeats, they aren't landing here. I mean, like, they like, there's not enough heavy lifting by the other instrumentation and the vocals that can really deter me away from, like, not appreciating that execution there. But outside of that, though, the work of the guitar during the verses, like, it's pretty solid. I do like what's going on there. The chorus is pretty solid as well. Like, I do like how Dexter sounds when he's vocalizing at the ends of phrases. Like, it's pretty good. And, like, at certain points, like, throughout this whole album, Dexter's vocals are pretty, like, they are somewhat processed, but, like, it's processed in a way that's, like, somewhat pleasing to the ears. So, like, I do appreciate how it does come across. And outside of those moments, like, I did appreciate the intro with the guitar and the bass trading off things to get things rolling. And, like, when I mean, like, trading off, like, you get the guitar doing a line, but the bass is also doing a line, but the guitar drops off and you just hear the bass, like, riding on the line and the guitar peaks back in. Like, I thought that was executed pretty well. The bridge in this track here, it's a nice change of pace considering the rest of the track here, but it really doesn't add all that much to the track, and it doesn't really, like, swing us back into the rest of the track with a greater sense of enthusiasm and, like, energy. On the lyrical front, like, I did appreciate the imagery that you get in the first verse where Dexter's singing about, like, a siren's flashing away, and, like, just the imagery of, like, a funeral and everything like that. I thought that was executed pretty well. And then, like, the whole song is basically about, like, Dexter lamenting how somebody that he really loved has died, and he's begging for them to not have died and to stay alive. So, like, on the lyrical front, it's pretty okay. But, like, if I had to be honest with you, the punk rock offbeat drum hits, they sink the song just a hair enough for it to be my bottom track off the whole record. The rest of the track is, like, it's good in its own right, and I think, like, the best part about the track is, like, right at the beginning where you get that trade off between the guitar and the bass. But otherwise, it's not a bad track, but yeah, it's my least favorite track off the whole album.
So I'm a titch higher on it than you, not enough to put it in my top 3, but at the same time, I kind of understand where you're coming from, because I didn't have a problem with the offbeat drumming, but it didn't really do anything for me either. Like, it was just kind of there, like, okay, we're thrashing, we're bashing, c'est la vie. And my biggest takeaway from this is that I thought the lyrics were kind of generic, to be honest. Like, I thought they were a little on the pretty standard side, and they come across a little shallow to me. And they also came across a little dark. Like, the lyrics seem very dark for a song this fast and upbeat. Which isn't to say you can't do that, but at the same time, it didn't come across as poignant or necessary in that regard. I also thought, you talk about the vocal processing. I did notice a little bit of over singing at the end of the chorus yet again. Not enough to the point where I docked it any points or put it as a bottom track, but it definitely relegated this to, as far as I know, about the album trackiest of album tracks off this whole record. So yeah, the end of the line, it's there, it exists, sure.
I feel like with the end of the line, and if I could, maybe foreshadow a little bit about my feelings about No Breaks, like we're transitioning from, the funness of Walla Walla into like just the big single that is coming up here, relatively shortly. Not next, but like, why don't you get a job? So like, these songs are like we've hit the punk rock section with Walla Walla, the end of the line, and No Breaks. So yeah, we're transitioning through some album tracks that present different flavors of punk. If I could describe it in that sense. So
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right, and I'll just go ahead and continue things on with No Breaks. I really only have one note about it, which is that, well, I only have one note written down, which is no breaks indeed, because this is a very fast, hard-paced song. And it's a song about having no breaks, about just going 100 miles an hour, push it to the limit, lifestyle, for better or worse. That being said, I do like it a little bit better than the end of the line, simply because it doesn't make any of the mistakes that the end of the line did. Like, the lyrics, they're not great by any means, but they're probably just as generic, but they're not as noticeably generic, if that makes any sense. Like, the end of the line felt like, okay, you're trying to be deep, but you're not quite getting there. Here, they're not trying to be deep, and they land safely in the shallow end of the pool. Fine, cool. You do you. But the band sounds good, vocals sound good. This is another track, much like the end of the line, which I think is very album tracky, but again, it doesn't do any of the things that I didn't quite like about the end of the line, to the point where I was like, eh. Here there was no eh. It was just a solid, good punk song.
I'm right there with you, like, in terms of, like, at least on a mentality standpoint, on that No Breaks is a step higher than the previous track, which was the end of the line. Like, it's very much punk rock to a T. Like, we get the punk offbeat drum hits again, but they're actually landing a little bit better here than the previous track, so they're not really that much of a deterrent. And the way that the whole track starts off, like, it's really good. Like, I love how in your face Dexter is, and how like the energy's brought out right out of the gate. Like, I love that. And just the whole energy. It's interesting that the song is presented in this fashion, because this song is basically, it's an anthem about how a manically depressed person feels, and like a line in the third verse kind of illustrates this a little bit with the line being, the fuses glow, wounds are festering till the wind comes up and takes it to the last pow, and like the pow is like illustrating like a fuse glowing, wounds festering, like a boil bursting, or like a fuse just popping, and like just winding up to the point of like just exploding and just releasing energy, which typically people who are manically depressed definitely can relate to that feeling. So outside of the lyrical themes, getting back into the nuts and bolts of that about this song here, and one other thing I want to highlight here is, like, I do like the part where the guitar is doing licks and it just fades away for a second, and the bass echoes that like note for note. Like, I thought that was a really well executed part. And in terms of like a phrase here that's that's repeated ad nauseum, and like it's like the theme for the whole track. It's all right. So yeah. But yeah, overall though, like, No Breaks is a decent punk rock song from The Offspring, and it's very much an album track, but like, it's one of the good, it's a decent deep cut off the whole record.
I agree. It's very much, it knows what it is, and it's very no frills, 100 miles an hour punk rock, which is never a bad thing. But that shifts dramatically with the next song and the last of the big hits off of this album, which is Why Don't You Get a Job? And I'm ready to talk about it if you are.
Oh yeah, baby. Why don't you get a job, man? So a little bit of some context behind this song here before I get into my main feelings about it. So the main tune here, do you know what song it bears a strong resemblance to?
I do know what song it resembles, which is the song Obla Di Obla Da by the Beatles.
Yeah, shout out to the Beatles, man. Pretty good band. So, but like in terms of like the resemblance of that song here, the band, like the band in that The Offspring only admitted with this song here, they were aiming for a campfire feel kind of song, which, I mean, who's to say what they were trying to go for at the time? We are not The Offspring. We are just mere listeners. So, not letting that influence my opinion about the song. But yeah, like in terms of lyrics, not much here for me to dive into. Lyrics are pretty straightforward. Two specific instances of relationships where the partner is frustrated with the unemployed person who is just taking advantage of the situation. So, yeah, pretty much that's it on the lyrical front. But I will say, though, on the lyrical front, I do enjoy the gender switch up in the song because I felt like that was executed really well. And in that gender switch up, the background vocal that is introducing that with, hey, let me tell you about my other friend now, and how Dexter is, singing the rest of the song, you can still hear that background vocal almost being like a hype man throughout the back half of the track. So I felt like that was executed very, very well. And outside of the lyrics and the gender switch up moments, like, I love the instrumentation. Like, we get a steel drum here, like, in this economy, in the late 90s on a punk rock album, the track here on a punk rock single, like, oh my god, like, I love that 10 times out of 10. Slap me in the face with that, Dexter, and wake me up in the morning. So, like, the way that the steel drum is used during the chorus, like, oh my god, I love how it's like, executed to a T. And I will say that the chorus here, comparing it to Pretty Fly for a White Guy, if I can continue on with that trope, this chorus is better than Pretty Fly for a White Guy. So, I had to do some soul searching there. So, and just the way that the whole track opens up, even to rewind even further, I love how it just opens where you just get the vocals, and then the instruments come in one by one. And for those of you who have seen the music video, or have yet to see the music video, like, that, it helps seeing the music video to understand the feeling that you get with that opening there, because, like, I can't unsee the music video when I'm listening to this song, if that's a proper way to phrase it there. So yeah, just the overall aspect of what it's going for, the way it's performed, the instrumentation, and just the overall, like, just execution of everything. Like, yeah, I absolutely love the song. And we have completed the top tracks on Americana by The Offspring, as bestowed upon by Ryan Jamalathu Kearns. Why Don't You Get a Job is my favorite track off the whole album.
Yeah, I honestly can't add too much more to this than what you already said. I agree wholeheartedly that for as simple as the lyrics are, I do love how it does do the gender diversity, for lack of a better term, throughout the song. I did like that opening too, not for the sonic reasons as much, but just sort of the very blatant, like, edge and attitude that it has. Like, it's not the most curt way or polite way to open up a song, but this is a punk band. What were you expecting? I love the steel drum. I love the campfire feel that they were going for. Yes, it does sound like Obla Di Obla Da. I don't care. That song rules too. Yeah, and also it does provide a nice change of pace because, like you say, with No Breaks, Walla Walla, and the end of the line, we basically just get three straight hard rock, boom, 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 go, go, go type songs. Here, not only is this band starting to show its sense of humor again, but starting to show its sense of musical diversity again, and in both cases, it pays off immensely. So yeah, much like you, I have completed my top three. I have this at number three. And for the record, I would say this chorus is as good, maybe slightly less memorable than Pretty Fly for a White Guy. Like, I think they're both on the same level, but if you're going to ask me what song is stuck in my head more right now, it's probably Pretty Fly for a White Guy, but Why Don't You Get a Job is very much a top three song for me as well.
Yeah, it's very hard for me to, like, compare the two because, like, they're two different songs, but yeah, I can respect your decision to, compare the two choruses there. So I'm glad that, like, this was in your top three though. So, yeah, you ready to talk about the penultimate track off the record? The penultimate self-titled, well, not well, yeah, self-titled track because it's Americana by The Offspring, and the track is Americana.
Yes, the penultimate title track, Americana, off of Americana. And we start with this very sparse drum intro, which I really, really liked. It reminded me a little bit of the song Everybody Wants Some by Van Halen. Just very sparse, very just that lone tom, just pulsing things in. And then it switches back to a more basic thrash, which I was kind of like, I kind of would have liked to see them go more straightforward with it, but, it's their decision, not mine. It doesn't sound bad at all. And lyrically, it basically drives a spike into the mainstream. And particularly in the mainstream I'm talking about is like 90s suburbia culture, 90s mall culture. Basically, what you think of when you think of the movie Clueless, but without the humor or self-awareness. Like, that's the kind of culture that they are going after with this song. The very polished, upper middle class, wear stuff from the Gap, nothing's wrong with our lives type of thing. And considering what they've talked about a lot on this album, like in Walla Walla, like in The Kids Aren't Alright, these guys have a reason to believe that things are not as alright as typical Americana may seem. So these lyrics do a really good job of driving that spike into the mainstream safety zone. So much so that it provides the only F-bombs on the entire album, which are very pronounced and are very effective in that regard. And lyrically, that is the highlight of this track. I did like that opening. I did like the lyrics. Otherwise, the band sounds good. Like, you're used to the thrash and bash at this point where I'm just like, okay, I kind of know what to expect instrumentally. But I do like how it cuts out before the chorus with the F-bombs, where it just sort of, I don't say it completely cuts out, but you definitely hear it, especially on the last of them at the end of the bridge, like before it gets to the solo. Like, that was really pronounced. So yeah, this is another track that could have snuck into my top three and on another given day might, but just missed the cut, probably in the top 4 or 5. But yeah, Americana, the title track, really, really good.
I think I'm right there with you, like, pound for pound, like, in terms of appreciation and, like, just general thoughts about this track here, because the lyrics do a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of my appreciation, because, like, it is basically a middle finger into, like, American society in the late 90s. I mean, one of my favorite bars off the whole record was found in the second verse. And when I mean the whole record, I mean, like, this track here specifically. In the verses talk about, like, now give you my cable, fast food, 4x tots right away. I want it right now because my generation don't like to wait. Like, basically that's Americana to a degree, for better or for worse. Even nowadays, when people are like, "Where's my DoorDash?" It like it said it was gonna be here 10 minutes ago, and it's taken 30 minutes. well, back in the day, pizza delivery wasn't like, instant either, but, I digress. So, but yeah, like outside of the lyrics and that, like the sentiment there, like, just I agree with you, the way that the F bombs are executed here, like they're great. And I do like the moments where the you get the cutouts in the track where the vocal line saying "I'd like to," and then the main groove of the track just comes crashing back in, like interrupting the Dexter's train of thought. Like I thought that was pretty good, and like I was a fan of the chorus. It's pretty solid. Millennials rejoice, like you get the woo-oos back again. So shout out to Millennials, you guys are the real ones out there. And like the key change in the track here, it's a solid moment as well. Just overall, this is a very solid song. The lyrics do help me appreciate the track to a greater extent. By I want to say a country mile. So much so like it could have been a top 3 track for me as well. But my relationship with "She's Got Issues" is well discussed. And then "Kids Aren't All Right," I would consider it's a better song overall. And then "Why Don't You Get a Job," iconic hit single, and it's executed to a T. So, yeah. I think that's pretty much wraps up Americana. Are you cool if we go into the final track off the record, which is "Pay the Man"?
Pay the Man. Yes, I'm ready.
So, the longest track off the whole record, and it's broken up into a couple different parts. So overall, it's a fun way to close off the record, and I'm glad that the band was able to put this as their closing track, because it kind of shows off their skills. And then at the very very end, when they do the reprise of "Pretty Fly," I thought that was it shows their humor and everything like that. So I was a fan of that. So, but what I mean by the band's ability to show off their skills, like the intro is so solid. Like it has a Middle Eastern kind of flair, and I was not expecting that in this record. By The Offspring, but yeah, and how that's how that's counteracted by the guitar come crashing in to that groove, and how those sync up. It's just so good, man. I was there 10 times out of 10, and one could make a make a metaphor that guitar is Americana and American influence, and you get the Middle East effect, America, Middle East. But this isn't "Hey, politics up to this." This is "Hey, listen to this." So, and outside of the moment with the guitar and the Middle Eastern flair syncing up, the soft-spoken vocals coming in, they add a very nice, interesting texture. Without specifically reading the lyrics, it's kind of hard to make out what they're saying. But I was a fan of that. And then the switch up that occurs about halfway into the track is just so flipping good. I'm a huge fan of that. And from that moment on, the way that the guitar is carrying the groove, it's so good. I know we discussed throughout several tracks and several moments here about how the Offspring are a punk rock group. Here, they're more just, they're flexing their skills, they're flexing their muscles, and they're being more of a rock group here. And I love it, man. And the chorus during the back half where they were talking about "Paying the Man," and how it just crashes in and grew so well. It's so flipping good. And then the track just, kind of just randomly deflates, and it just kind of randomly ends, which, okay, cool, I guess. And then from there, like I alluded to at the start of the discussion about the track, you get the "Pretty Fly" reprise, which but here the reprise is almost like a Spanish theme rendition, and it's a fun ending. I can't fault the track for ending it. Can't fault the track and the album for ending in such a fashion. But yeah, I'm a fan of that. And then briefly about the lyrical front. So the man in this scenario is the government, and like it's interesting to think about that because like the Offspring's previous album, Index on the Hombre, translates to F the Man, stated by Dexter Holland, the lead singer here. And coincidentally, Pay the Man was actually supposed to be on that album, but Dexter didn't feel like it fit with the themes of of that album, so decided to save the this track here, for the release of Americana. And like one of my favorite moments here lyrically on Pay the Man is in the second verse where they're talking about like seeing the way the sun sets, twilight of this life. The man is making little bets with our lives. All that I believe now, anything is possible. A simple explanation for the evil in the world, and like that goes back to harkens back to like the opening track, Have You Ever, where he's talking about crime does pay, and like just the overall like sentiment of like just being disenchanted by the American dream at this point. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of Pay the Man. Catch Me on a Different Day. It's another track that could pop into a top 3 contention, but it's an excellent way to end off the whole record.
So a couple things to start off my thoughts on Pay the Man. First of all, I do agree with you that the reprise of Pretty Fly for a White Guy is pretty funny. It's a nice way to end the album officially. I am glad that you mentioned that this track was originally supposed to be on an earlier album, because that does make a lot of sense to me. Like, to me, this comes off as a track that comes from the more experimental side of 90s rock, like towards the middle of the decade, where bands were just kind of trying anything and everything and, seeing if it would stick. Bands like the Spin Doctors come to mind. Also throw Nirvana in there a little bit. Maybe even Pearl Jam. Definitely Pearl Jam. Let's just say definitely Pearl Jam. They were experimenting with different things, and this sounds like a track from that era more so than a lot of the tracks that precede it. But for those of you who have your unofficial, hey, listen to this scorecard, you may notice that there is a blank space missing, and I will fill that in right now because unfortunately I do have this as my second least favorite track on the album. And for me, it's a couple things. First of all, I just think that as much as the band sounds all right throughout the track, I did kind of dig that opening with the Middle Eastern flair. It very much reminded me of The End by The Doors. Also, something like Seasons in the Abyss by Slayer. I was also thought about because it did have that little Middle Eastern tinge. But it just dragged on way too long for me. And also, the way you talk about those soft vocals that come in on that first part, I didn't think they were produced well at all. I thought they sounded very thin and overprocessed to the point where I couldn't really understand what was being said, and I didn't really appreciate it. Second part of it feels a little bit more on brand, like traditional 90s grunge-ish type sound, which I thought was okay. Lyrics I thought were pretty good. Standard stuff about the struggles of dealing with the quite literal cost of everyday life, in which you have to pay the man his due, whether it be through your money or through your time or through your life as a whole. But yeah, like this is I had to think about it, and I thought, is this a track I really need to listen to ever again outside of the context of this album? And the answer is no. So yeah, I got Pay the Man at second worst. It's not a horrible track, but it was just kind of meh for me and just overstayed its welcome a little bit.
Hey, I can understand that, man, especially with it being a 10-minute long track on a punk rock album by The Offspring. So, but, as for us in this review, we're not going to overstay our welcome. We've said our piece. We've stated our opinions. We've dived into lyrical themes. We've given backstories. We've given front stories. We've given side stories. And we've provided insight to every single track off this record. So that being said, there's only one thing left to say about this review.
We did it.
We did it, man. We experienced Americana on July 1st, with this episode being released maybe by July 5th, most likely by July 5th of 2025. So I'm going to go first in terms of my overall thoughts and rating of the album, and then I'll kick it over to you. Solid punk rock album for me. And it's funny, like, going back and, like, prior to doing the review here, I thought Americana wasn't going to be, like, a Offspring album that would hold up in high regard compared to, like, other albums that I mentioned, like, Inex on Ombre, Conspiracy of One, Splinter, and then, like, Smash, even to, go back into their breakthrough album with that album there. But, I found great deep cuts, found appreciations for not Pretty Fly for a White Guy, but, like, found renewed appreciations for the big singles off of the record. And, like, the moments where, like, the punk rock offbeat drum hits where they don't land, it's not, like, a total detriment to my overall experience of the whole album. Like, that's just one track where it doesn't specifically land. But as an overall package, I did appreciate what the band was bringing to the table. And yeah, I'm just an overall fan of this album. So I'm feeling a strong 9 out of 10 for Americana by The Offspring.
9 out of 10, all right. For me, I agree with you. It is a very solid punk rock album. Again, I come into this with having no real experience with The Offspring, aside from hearing a couple of the big hits smattering of times. But I came away with it very impressed. Like you mentioned, like there's a couple of down moments, like the just, to me, sexist talk of She's Got Issues, to the dragginess of Pay the Man. But ultimately, the band has highlights even on those songs, and at its best, it's showcasing its musical diversity. At its least, it's just bashing and thrashing with a solid sonic precision. So yeah, I'm glad that your friend Matt, Australian Matt, chose this album for us, because I enjoyed listening to it quite a bit. It sounds very 90s. It sounds very crisp. It sounds very of its time, and yet, in some ways very, eternal, especially in some of the songs like Americana or The Kids Aren't Alright. As far as a numerical rating, I had to think about it, because there were moments where I was like, is this album, like, super good? And I compare it to an album we talked about many moons ago, which was Why Would You Watch by Hot Mulligan. I gave that an 8 out of 10, and I had to think to myself, would I listen to this album more or less than that? And I think it's about the same. So I'm going to give this album, Americana by The Offspring, an 8 out of 10.
So your 8 and my 9. That makes it pretty easy to come up with the average here. It's a solid 8.5 out of 10, because
Math
works for everyone. It doesn't discriminate. It doesn't hate. So in terms of next album recommendations for me on my front here, now I could, go with an album that maybe follows more of the lyrical themes or the sonic textures that this album was bringing to the table. But I'm going to recommend a album from The Offspring, and I've talked about this album at several points throughout this whole review, and it is their album Conspiracy of One. So, yeah, a lot of the tracks off of there are super good. Like, Want You Bad is like an iconic, for me, punk rock love song. And for those of you who haven't listened to that, like, that's Ryan Kern's musical canon there, right to a T. Original Prankster is good too. Several tracks off the whole album are really good, and like that whole album is Ryan Kern's canon and helped develop my musical taste for one way or another. So yeah, for me, Conspiracy of One by The Offspring would be my next album recommendation here.
And for me, it kind of came down to a couple albums. As far as what I was going to recommend, it was either going to be Dookie by Green Day or Toxicity by System of a Down. I'm going to go with Dookie because, to me, this album very much follows that same punk trend, and also follows a lot of the themes. Like, this feels more like a counterpart to the sitting on a sidewalk, contemplating life, punk attitude of the 90s more so than it did the sonic thrash and bash of System of a Down of the early 2000s. So, yeah, that's another great punk album. I'd say maybe about a step above this one. But if you're looking for some good punk music, go to Dookie by Green Day, based off of your appreciation of Americana by The Offspring.
Excellent recommendation there. They very much a pure album at the time, with Americana by The Offspring. So, ladies and gentlemen, to summarize, our overall rating was an 8.5 out of 10. I recommended Conspiracy of One by The Offspring as the next album recommendation, and Matthew recommends Dookie by Green Day. So, yeah, that pretty much wraps up Americana by The Offspring, and solid review, man. I was glad that we were able to tackle the record, and it's actually encouraged me to check out more of The Offspring going forward.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. Again, good choice, Australian Matt. You picked a good one to kick off whatever number. I mean, this is number one in a long series of potential listener requests, and I think we started out on a good note for this one.
I agree with you 100%. So, speaking of notes, and where we were going on a musical journey, the next note that we are going to be exploring is going to be determined by your brain, Matthew. So, what is your brain cooking up, and what are the next notes that we might be exploring in terms of a musical review with our next episode?
So, once again, I'm going to throw it back as far as the date we're going to be talking about. And as far as musicality, we're going to be going in either a slightly different direction or a vastly different direction. But in either case, I'm going to give you a choice between 2 years, and these are the years that these albums were released. Your options are going to be either 1963 or 1969.
Do I be a basic brain person and go with 1969 because of, well, but no, you know what? I'm gonna choose the other option. I'm gonna go 1963.
Okay. So 1963 it is, and we are going in a much different direction for our next review. We are going from the world of 90s punk to the world of singers and standards of pop tradition. And we are going to be talking about the debut album by a legend in the pop culture and traditional pop universe, and also one of the most infamous people on planet Earth. I am talking about Miss Barbra Streisand and her debut album entitled The Barbra Streisand Album from 1963.
All right, man. All right. So the Barbra Streisand album by Barbra Streisand from 1963. Man. Okay, cool. I'm down for it. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you've not listened to that Barbra Streisand album, make sure you check out that album before next week's review. That way you can have opinions about the album itself, and you can have opinions about the opinions that me and Matt are bringing to the table. So, yeah, man, I can't wait for next week's review. It's going to be a good time.
It is going to be a good time, and I think our opinions are going to be strong. I think they're going to be hard, and no breaks.